Welcome, everyone. I'm Neil.
And I'm Dan.
And I'm
Jill. Oh!
No, we're keeping that. We're totally keeping that.
I'm still Jill.
And welcome to the grand nitpicking finale, everyone.
Aww. 7 years.
Yeah.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy. End of an era.
You spend as much time doing this podcast as I spent in graduate school.
Yeah, but like you gotta to be a doctor out of it, and we just got like on Patreon.
You had this podcast
but
running.
What they pay you as a grad student is approximately $5 a month.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, you had this podcast running longer than Trump was president.
Thank God.
Ooh.
Yeah, right?
And I'll bet you if we ran against him, we would still win the popular vote.
Ooh. I don't know. I've never been popular in my life.
One time, right after Trump was elected, when I was like, you know, I was still in the like crying in the shower phase of the Trump presidency. I was like crying and I was like, Steve, I would be a better president than Trump. And my husband was like, babe, you're unelectable.
Here's the thing. Both of those statements are true.
Although, like in the days of Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'm starting to wonder
True.
who is not electable. I mean,
Yeah.
All right, so let us get started. So I think we should start first with, why do we think the nitpicking podcast even worked?
I can go on that. It's because it's us. Like, it's literally the intersection of us. Like for those who didn't follow from the very, very beginning, and I think we mentioned this on the very first episode, this came out of a conversation I had with Ryan Beater when I was on a podcast with him, where he was like, we were joking about something, and I brought up like this. Oh, we were talking about I brought up the pads on TNG, and how we had this headcanon about like there were piles of them under Picard's desk in his ready room because people were just constantly like, they're a one-use thing. Like, they hold like what, a couple kilobytes of text, maybe a couple images. Like, that's it.
I think they hold exactly one file.
Right. And that got them laughing, and we were talking about like how you and I watch it and like comment on as we're watching it, and he's like, you should totally do a podcast, because it was like this intersection of like pointing out the ridiculousness of it and also what we loved about it. So at least that was my answer, that because it's just us, it's what we do anyway.
Yeah, I feel like it worked best when it was a television show, which you clearly enjoyed, but also like had flaws, either, you know, as a relic of its time or just because it was flawed in general, right?
Yeah. I think from my perspective, I mean, part of the reason why it worked, at least, you know, in the episodes that I was on, is that, you know, we had such a long history of doing this, you know, like we used to come together for movie night.
Basically just recording movie night, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you know, we're all a bunch of jackals, and so it was just natural that we should come and jackal together.
Now I'm just picturing Will Riker in a forest, and he comes out of the woods, and he says, "Clever girls."
Because yeah, I mean, movie night lasted about 7 years too. Like, we did that a really long time. And context for, I don't know, I guess we mentioned movie night on the podcast. But
No, I don't think we have.
we did, yeah. Movie
Have
night.
we not?
Oh gosh, movie night.
Yeah, I feel like we did, because I think you'd explained how it started as Prisoner Tuesdays.
Yeah, and it was my attempt to like, it's that weird liminal space like after you finish college where you're like, how do I make friends without a formalized context? Like, I didn't know like how to meet people or do anything, and so I invited a couple people at work to what was originally Prisoner Tuesdays, and we got through the Prisoner, and people were like, "Oh, we should keep doing this." And then we started doing a couple anime series, and that didn't really work out. And then people started bringing a movie every week, and then we got to have so many people. We had to make rules about like when you got on the list and when you dropped off the list, and like.
Oh, I feel more lucky now because I met all of you because I worked with Jill and just was like, Jill, you are my friend now. And then followed her to movie night and was like, I am all of your friends now. Because it was that I had just graduated from college. I kind of randomly moved to Philadelphia. I only knew my roommate, like, and so then I was like, Jill, I shall follow you around like a baby duck.
I mean, and it worked out. Like, here it is. Mm-hmm. We'll not say how many years later, but many years later.
Yes, let's not.
And we're all still friends.
Yeah. 3 years later.
Right.
Yeah, I basically adopted Sin.
It all started when I called you drunk in the middle of the night to ask if Wonder Woman had an invisible plane.
Yes, that was part of it. And then there was also when we were in the repeat room together, and the guys came in and were talking about mounting boxes on studs, and you and I were both like,
yeah. Yes, we also, like, we just can't emphasize enough how truly shitty that job was. Oh, can I curse? Is that allowed?
It's fine. If we get bleeped on YouTube or something, I'll figure it out. But yeah, it was just, and I feel like Nitpicking was just an extension of that. It was exactly like Jill said. It was just movie night with a recorder on, like. Whenever we did like not live podcasts, but like whenever we did podcasts here and we watched them beforehand, we were all sitting on the sofa groaning and making comments at the screen and like.
Yes, and then we'd be like, "Remember that thing you said when?"
Right.
Yes, many T-shirts could have been made from movie night.
It's true.
Yeah. So, all right. So here's a question. So, of all the series that we've nitpicked, which one do you think worked the best as a nitpicking project?
I feel like, I mean, my favorite is TNG, which is, of course, the classic. I feel like that works super well because, like, it is so beloved, but also when you think about it with any sort of, like, critical lens, you're like, oh, actually, this is extremely problematic. I feel like Bab 5 for like similar reasons.
Yeah, for me, that's the ranking. It's TNG closely followed by B5 for those reasons. Like, because like TNG and a little more on TNG for me because it was just so beloved of me as a kid. Like that was my formative entry into science fiction as like watching an entire series. Like I had read sci-fi, but like. I never really watched the original series. I would see like Star Wars and other movies and stuff like that. But like fully geeking out and watching a TV show every week, like TNG was my entry. And it like followed me from like junior high to college.
I feel like TNG holds up pretty well also because like I feel at least what I love about that show is the characters, right? And so what we were picking apart really was like the plots or you know, details about how things work, or in some cases, the fact that Geordi is a creep or whatever, but it doesn't really take apart, like, the things we nitpicked didn't necessarily detract from the things we loved.
Yeah, I would agree with all that, and I have the same ranking for my top two, and, you know, for purely selfish reasons, too, just that, you know, like Dan, I have such a soft spot for TNG, so it's hard for that not to be my first because, you know, I for all its many flaws, it's hard not to have that warm place in your heart for it, and so that makes it like especially fun to tear to pieces, just like we pick on each other.
Do you agree, Neil?
I do, but let me say this much. I was pleasantly surprised by how much fun it was to nitpick Vampire the Masquerade.
Yes, that was a sleeper hit.
I mean, it was just so trashy. Like you can't not enjoy that. Like you're just rolling in the filth a little bit.
I feel like the fact that it was like 9 episodes, like it would not have worked if it was 30 episodes.
Yes.
But like short, trashy, makes no sense, then you're done.
Or seven seasons, imagine.
Right. Jesus Christ. No, I think that's exactly, Sin has it exactly right. It was like the fact that it was only 8 or 9 episodes like made it work to a certain extent. Because like on the other end of the extreme, like the two that really sort of didn't work for me, like the nadir has to be The Prisoner. Like ironically that it started as,
Neil's face says it all.
What's really funny is that like for me, to a certain extent, the Prisoner was also connected to movie night, because we mentioned that it started as Prisoner Tuesdays, but it showed to a certain extent how much I've changed with regards to media. I hadn't really watched it in the, we will not say how many years in between, and it just, I mean, like y'all got it like dead on. It's 90% vibes, and like. And if you don't feel that vibe, like if you don't buy it, it's not going to work for you. You know what I mean? Like your dog agrees. Like
But that was me growling.
that's great. But it is
Yeah,
like
I actually liked The Prisoner more than I liked Alien Nation.
Okay.
I have to say, because like The Prisoner,
Interesting.
at least
I
was,
did
like,
not.
It was trying to do a thing, right? Like it was reaching, it was trying to reach really high and like not making it. But like Alien Nation was just like, it's an allegory about racism.
Over and over and over and over. But
and I think that's a vibe. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I didn't have quite the same reaction, even though I agree with your points, but for me, I still liked Alien Nation better. And again, I think it just has to do with because I was more familiar with it. I had never really watched The Prisoner. I'd watched a few episodes. I think we talked about it when I did my episode. And it hadn't resonated with me. Whereas I did watch Alien Nation a bit when I was a kid, and it was the first run. So I had that familiarity. So I think that's the small thing that put it above the other.
I had never
otherwise
seen
I would
it
agree.
and was not coming in with fond memories and did not develop them.
Although, interestingly for me, while I think in terms of a podcast, the Prisoner was sort of the hardest one to do, the one I think I disliked the least was Enterprise.
I mean, dislike the most?
Oh, dislike the most. Sorry, yeah, dislike.
I was going to say, did you see my eyes? I was like, are you kidding?
Dislike the most was Enterprise. Like, it felt like there was just nothing there, like to even like talk up at all.
I would argue that it's even worse than that, because it had enough things there that they could have done and failed to realize that it actually made it worse than if it was just bad. Like, Vampire the Masquerade, not
Kindred the Embrace.
Show was terrible, but we didn't have any expectations of it being otherwise. It didn't even try to be anything otherwise. It was just trash through and through. But it's like with Enterprise, like there were nuggets there where you're like, are they going to go in an interesting direction? And then they didn't. And
it's they're just like, no. Like, yes, to
really
me, Enterprise is the most tragic of the treks because it's so close to being something interesting and great. And every time they're like, what if instead we show you the Vulcan in a tight pair of pants?
Right.
Again.
Modern, I mean, not to go off on a huge aside, but modern Trek in general for me has been a huge disappointment. Like, even in the age of streaming where there's all these new series and stuff like that, I watched several episodes of Discovery. We did a podcast episode on one of them. Believe it or not, my favorite modern Star Trek is the cartoon series Lower Decks.
Lower Decks is good, but also we started watching, is it Strange New
Worlds?
And that is the most classic Trek of the new Treks, and thus my favorite of them.
Okay.
I haven't gotten to watch it yet because I refuse to pay for yet another streaming service. But I do want to watch it at some point.
I will say we are not paying for yet another streaming service.
No comment. No comment.
Yeah.
So, Sid, why is Strange New Worlds like what's got you on like interested in that?
It is. I mean, so it is set like it's Captain Pike and Number One, right? So it's like taking off of the pilot of the original series is where it comes off of. But it's the most like a classic Trek. It's the most episodic. Like it still has a through line of the series, but it's the most kind of like we go to a planet and we have an adventure on that planet, and like it's sort of almost like a Buffy style where you have a big bad of the season and you have a overarching thing of the season, but it's still episodic, right? And so to me, it's the closest of that like TNG. Like you still have you have more continuity than TNG still, but it's more like that classic Trek. Like we're gonna go to a planet and have an adventure, and like then we're gonna go to the next planet and have a slightly different adventure, right?
Does it have anything to say though? Like, does it answer any questions?
It does. It's really
Okay,
interesting.
good.
Yeah, it does in a way that
Good.
I like.
Cool.
So, all right. So, Dan and I have been talking about this for a while. We always talk about this stuff. So, during the run of the Nitpicking podcast, we came out with various headcanons, right? Things that were only true to us. So, what was one that you really liked? A headcanon that you thought you liked or was your favorite?
I feel like the Star Trek mindfuck is pretty my favorite.
So,
Yes.
so Dan, tell us what the mind fuck is.
So apparently we came to the conclusion. I don't remember where it first. Well, basically, it came up. We knew the episode with Wesley being tortured during his test was there, and it's
It's for Starfleet Academy.
Starfleet Academy. It was kind of there, and it was our way of explaining why everybody in the Federation was so stunningly bland and sort of like had no affect when tragedy happened, or like, do you know what I mean? Like, because early on, there's the episode where the Emoto blows up, like with all hands on deck, like a copy of the Enterprise, and Wesley is the only one that gets upset, and Picard's like, "Shut the fuck up!" Like, we're Starfleet, just move on. 1,000 people died, whatever.
But it's not military, remember?
Hey,
Remember.
and so like we were like, why is everybody so bland and just like dead-eyed? And then we remembered the episode, and we saw the episode where Wesley, like, people are dying and caught under like piping, and there's steam, and like he has to face the trauma of his father and leaving someone behind. And we were just like, so they just do this to everybody. They just mind fuck them, and like now they are the broken shells of people that run Starfleet. Like, okay, sure, let's go with that.
Yeah.
And we always brought it up. That was something we came back to again and again.
I think my favorite headcanon was Dr. Crusher equals Dr. Mengele. It's really, and Phlox is worse. And, though at least Phlox is like the most painfully cheerful Mengele that ever was.
But yeah, the idea that she was stalking the ship, just stunning people and dragging them off to her lab. That she did something truly horrible back at Starfleet Medical, and the cover up is why she's back on the Enterprise. Like that had its own subcanon. Like, like there was a whole ongoing storyline. Like,
I also really liked the "So You're in a Post-Scarcity Society" pamphlet that we decided they needed.
Right.
like in Up the Long Ladder, to
Exactly,
explain to people that, like, yes, you don't need to bring your sheep, and
Yes. Please stop trying to sleep with Riker. You don't have to do that.
right.
That was the episode where the woman who is like coming on to takes off her skirt to reveal another.
record.
And a crop top table knit sweater.
That's right. Oh, yes. You know, I think for me, it's probably that Jordy is in total HR problem because he has hit on women both real and virtual.
Sometimes the same woman.
Right.
Yes, exactly. And do you remember? Well, I mean, of course, you, Jill and Sid, you did the episode Aquino.
We
Which
did.
is,
We took that bullet for you because we love you that much.
I was so happy that we didn't have to do that episode.
There were so many. There was like Data really has emotions, but no one talks about them. The continual shut up Data moments. Like, oh, the fact that the computer can literally do anything if you just ask it the right way.
The
Like,
fact that the computer is always steering the ship, but they pretend it doesn't.
right.
Right. I remember Sid in that episode. You're like, so everyone's freaking out because they're giving the computer a little more control.
Right.
I was so mad. I was so angry at that episode. I was like, it's always steering the ship, you idiots.
And it was this really dramatic moment. What will happen? What slippery slope will this
Right.
lead us on?
Mm-hmm. Right. If the computer does 2% more than it usually does.
Although I think it's telling that a lot of our headcanon comes from TNG.
It's
Like,
true.
I mean, there was a couple other ones, like even, believe it or not, Kindred had headcanon, like the fact that Lily ran around San Francisco in wolf form and there were like wolf sightings everywhere. Like,
Right.
like she couldn't get a cab, like she just had to warg everywhere. Like,
She had a car. She had a car.
Yeah, but you know what? If I had a choice between a car and being a badass wolf running about, I would take the wolf form.
You know, I remember in that series, remember there's an episode where Julian takes his girlfriend out to the country, which is like, they make it like it's forever away, and it's like 30 minutes outside
Yes.
San Fran. And he's getting attacked by thugs. So he approaches them in wolf form and turns back to the less combat capable form to fight them. Like, Julian, you were better as a wolf. Fight that way.
They didn't want to have to pay the
There's
animal
also
trainer.
all the vampires are a weird giant polycule headcanon in that show. That was pretty good.
I don't even know that was a headcanon. Wasn't that just the
That
show?
was just canon.
yeah, it goes from subtext to text. Like, yeah.
I mean, they all live together in that great big house. It's like, I mean, that's a little weird, y'all.
And they all make out, and it's unclear what's happening.
I mean, I guess my second favorite headcanon is actually from the Kindred, which is just that windows are always open until they're very much not.
Until someone's gonna jump through them, and then somebody runs over and closes them.
Otherwise, they're open, and that's why that show couldn't have gone through 7 seasons, because they couldn't have afforded the billowing curtain budget.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a couple other ones we had for Alien Nation. It's everything important happens in a different warehouse. Like every like scene that involves like some climactic fight with a bad guy has to just move the cardboard boxes in a different shape and we'll be fine. Like,
Babylon 5 had that. It doesn't matter what commander's on the ship, whether it's Sinclair or Sheridan. Ivanova really runs the station, and they just like cut the ribbons and shake the hands.
Again, I don't think that's a headcanon. I literally think that's the show.
Also, that Garibaldi is clearly an HR nightmare. Also,
Ugh, he's so gross.
Oh. So, all right, so here's a question. Wait. So who is the worst manager's headache? Jordy or Garibaldi?
gotta be Garibaldi, right? Like Jordy is a creep, but Garibaldi's a fascist creep.
Right. And belligerent to boot.
And
So, like, if you tried to
going
correct
through
him.
everybody's personnel files and crap, right? And like beating people up, locking them in jail, like it's definitely Garibaldi.
And you know, ironically, Garibaldi felt totally comfortable locking people up until the one time his commander actually told him to do it. We've Morden. Then he's like, oh, civil liberties. Like, what? Let me think. Now I'm getting on to all the counts we used to keep for TNG.
Worf getting his ass kicked, the ship taken over, Data having black boxes inside of him.
Oh wait, there was I forgot a delightful headcanon, which is that Worf, I mean this is basically just canon, right? That Worf like basically has just read a bunch of Klingon like fan fiction and like all the other Klingons are like, wait, we don't really care about honor, dude. Like that's just like what we claim.
That's why those Klingon episodes are my favorite. He comes into like the council chambers and is like, "This is a hive of scum and villainy," and they're like, "Yeah, it's politics, dude. Like, what the fuck? Like, this is the equivalent of a kid from England who moves to the United States, reads a bunch of books about knights and princesses and shit, goes back, and they're like, "What are you babbling about?" Like,
right, like he's milording and all that stuff, and they're like, oh, "Excuse me."
Like, do you want a Coke? Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like,
right. Yeah, I remember. I think Worf getting his ass kicked was the top category because it happened like 19 times in the course of the season.
And the person who did it the most, who did it twice, was Troy.
Oh yeah, yeah. She like only Q did it as much as she did.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, she did it twice in one episode one time. It was the same episode. She does it twice.
And she was possessed by different alien things, like, which was another thing that happened. People being taken over by stuff and...
But Picard actually held the record for that.
Right. Well, I forgot that headcanon. That after that episode, it's not Picard anymore. It's the alien thing that, like, came back. Like...
That's a good one.
Right. It was never him. Like, in season 5, it's still that alien.
Right.
Yeah. He's all floating in the nebula.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the sub headcanon to that is just that the transporter is a murder machine.
Yes. The transporter is definitely a murder machine.
You know, there's an episode of Enterprise, I think it's the second season, when Archer has a guest, like the guy who designed who invented the transporter, right? And they're at dinner, and the transporter inventor is like, "You know, Captain, I had such a hard time proving to people that it was actually you on the other side of the transporter." I'm like, "Can you prove it to me, please?"
I mean,
Because I don't know.
What I love about Lower Decks is it makes fun of this to a certain extent, but like we've had duplicates. Like we've got the two Wills. Like we know you can end up with multiple copies of people. Like that is canon.
Yeah.
Right. And like, of all that crew to be duplicated, like...
yeah, we need more Will Riker. Yes.
And like, the other one is just as much of a screw-up as he is. He just tries to be a terrorist and screws that up.
Much.
I guess you've just proven that they're really the same person.
That's right. All right. Here's some headcanon, which is only kind of related to TNG. It's mostly the greater Star Trek universe. So, in the last Generations movie, the last TNG movie, right? Riker finally gets his own ship that he accepts. I'm convinced the only reason that happened is because this is after the Dominion War, and a lot of captains are dead.
They're like, "Oh, we're stuck with this guy."
Right.
Right. Like,
We've got too many ships, not enough people to captain them. Just give it to him.
Right. Like, we don't think he's a Romulan collaborator, so sure, fine.
They're like, "This guy can't be a Romulan. He's too inept."
Yeah, they wouldn't take him.
There was another thing we used to track during TNG. The category was Ro was right.
Yeah, I think you ran out of paper tracking that one.
Yes.
And we tried to do it just per episode because, like, if you did it in an episode, it's like, well, she was right about this, and she was right about this, and she was right about this. Like, so we just said episodes where Ro was right, which is basically every episode she's in.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if this is headcanon or just an observation, but in Babylon 5, right, Sheridan is obviously like a greater, larger than life person. But in season 5, his political decisions, I think, are questionable. I think he's a terrible politician.
Yes.
So why do you think so, Zin?
Oh, does he because he is not good at compromise at all. Like he never wants to like negotiate or like think about things. He just is always like, I'm right and we're gonna like fight about it, right?
Well, and that's a theme that runs through B5. The
Yeah.
politicians are ridiculous, and why do we even have them? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and the irony of making him president, and then after saying all that, and then him being so miserable.
I mean, I think that, like, and I really wish they'd brought that into the storytelling. That instead of everyone pretending he's this wonderful politician, they recognize that he was really good at the military stuff, but he's fallen down on being the president of the Interstellar Alliance.
Yeah, but that would ruin him as being the self-insert character for JMS.
And also like be extremely
Ooh, did I say that out loud?
You did.
Right. Yeah. Exactly, Sin.
Yeah.
But yeah, the season 5 frustrates me a lot for that reason. You know, you've got him and Delenn, who I have liked the rest of the series, but like them being this like power couple, you know, her with the religion and spiritual and him with the political and military, and it's very uncomfortable for me.
Well, and then you layer on the blandest love story ever told.
yes.
Yes. Bland and zero chemistry,
I was
unfortunately.
gonna say that. They just have no chemistry at all.
Yeah.
I know. I never understood why Jakar wanted to spy on them.
Oh,
Like,
that's so gross.
I mean, they're not doing the wild thing; they're doing the mild thing. I mean,
Yeah. I think that's another case where it's difficult to draw the line between headcanon and actual story, as whether JMS is actually a freak who likes to watch people have sex or
I mean,
not.
that is obvious, right? Like
It comes up so
100%.
many
There's like a
times.
million, like most of the sex scenes in that show feature somebody else weirdly watching.
Yeah,
Like
there's
a
a lot of
shitload
weird.
of telepaths.
yeah.
I mean, I feel like it comes
Man.
out of that conversation we had about how like sci-fi in the 70s was just excuses for the authors to get their kinks out.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah. Oh yeah.
it was just like, oh, it's time travel. Yeah, and you just went back in time and had sex with yourself. That's sheerly coincident. Like all of the sci-fi in the 70s was just like erotica by other terms. Like,
Yep. All the 70s sci-fi was like, you are a very intelligent man. You have sex with many alien ladies.
That's the truth. So, all right. So, leaving headcanon for a moment. So, what was a favorite moment on a podcast that you did, that you were part of?
I think for me it was probably Brit Francitanica.
which is another headcanon. I forgot about that. That was totally a joke we came back to again and again. Do you know they try explaining Britannica? I can't even say it.
Brit Francitanica.
In the second season of Picard, like they try, like retconning why he has that ridiculous accent, and it's like, really?
Yeah, I didn't get as far as the second season of Picard. But
Don't.
at the end of the first season, I was like, wow, that jumped the shark real fast. That didn't just jump the shark, that jumped and landed in the shark's mouth, as far as I could tell.
You know, all right, this is a moment from Kindred the Embrace. Sin, you were guesting on the episode with the musician vampire.
God, that guy. Yes.
And I remember there's a part where there's this fan and he takes her out to some like deserted field. He leaves her and he leaves her. And I remember, and you said, this is a quote, you were like, and he doesn't even give her a ride. Christ, what an asshole.
I stand by that.
It was so funny.
Like, you're just leaving her in a field? Like, what's wrong with you?
Right. And he just turned her into a vampire. You'd think he'd give her a courtesy ride. Nope.
Seriously. Now she has to figure out how to, like, turn into a wolf to run back to the city.
Right.
I think my favorite is the episode where they all de-evolve, and for some reason, giant dinosaur wolf is super horny for, like, frog Deanna, even though they're not the same species. Like,
Right. Yes.
Yeah, you literally said, why is Dino Wharf horny for, like, Toad Deanna? Like, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it was like, why?
I still have that question. It was never solved.
Never solved. Now, my favorite moment from one of Sin's episodes was was it Galaxy's Child, when they're in the Jeffries tube? And you were like, it's totally gonna wear my face is his face. When I was listening to that episode, I had to turn off and like laugh and cry for like 5 minutes on the subway because I couldn't handle it.
Yes.
I think I have a ton of favorite moments, and we usually use them because one thing I really loved about nitpicking. So you were back, sort of connecting back to the original question about what worked. We stumbled on the idea of doing a previously on from the very first episode where we play the quote from Ryan saying you guys should do a podcast, and then after that we would do like every single episode something funny. And there were just so many great quotes, and like it would just set the tone for what was about to come. You knew what was like going to happen when you went into the podcast. Two of my favorite moments. One ended up there, and one was at the end. The episode of TNG when they have Jesus Christ, the wormhole, and the psychic guy who is there negotiating, and for some reason, since he has this flat Midwestern accent, we assume that the Crystalians were like, they all talk like they're from Fargo.
Yes.
And it was like you, Neil, and Jill, and I, and like you both going, oh yeah, you betcha. Like,
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was like, yup, had warp drive for 300 years. You betcha.
Yeah, betcha.
the other thing that we did that I can't remember, like I think Neil had been thinking about this, and we stuck it at the end, was the Identical Cousins cover.
Yes, the song.
I was gonna bring that up. Yes.
Oh, it was so good.
That was another time I had to stop the episode and like weep to myself on the subway listening, because I usually listen to it while commuting to work when I used to still have an office to go to. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I remember. I think it was we recorded that episode a while before we had to post it, and we pointed out that it was the same woman playing both Romulans, and I immediately thought of the Patty Duke show. So I'm like, all right, I gotta filk this song.
And so Neil started running it, and then we found like just the backing audio, which was like I don't know why somebody posted it, but it was just the backing audio for the Patty Duke show.
Mm-hmm.
Planets aligning.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, and I remember us at the mic, and I felt very sort of like Peter Brady, in the recording studio. Yeah, that was a lot. It was one of the most fun things we got to do in this podcast, because nobody ever asked me to sing, so it was nice.
That was awesome.
I think the live podcasts I really enjoyed, especially Two Bits.
I like both of them. Two Fix is funnier.
Tubix cake? That
Yes.
was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
And that-
I think that the thing that I liked about the one with the lamp, though, was that there was a child in the audience.
What is there? I don't remember this.
It was Pierce brought his daughter.
Daughter. Oh,
That's it.
gosh.
Yes.
Sorry.
And that was just a very spicy episode to have brought a child look. And I was sitting next to them, and I kept looking over like,
That is not the episode I would choose to bring a minor to.
Well, if it helped, where we were in the bookstore, we were directly overlooking the porn section. So we were like, it was behind the audience, so Dan and I were facing it. While we're talking about like Turkana 4, I'm like, oh look, it's shaving Ryan's privates.
Oh my god.
Dawson's Crack.
But the live podcasts in general were a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and like I remember just like Tuvix is so terrible. It's so easy. Like, well, I mean, all of Voyager was bad. I don't think there is a good Voyager episode. I just don't.
I think some of them are good, but it's very uneven.
I mean, Jerry Ryan was one of the best track actors I think they ever had.
Yeah.
But I mean, she was kind of wasted on that show.
Yeah, there's some where like Janeway gets to like kick ass that are pretty good. But in general, there's also the one where like she and Tom have lizard babies and they just leave them on a planet and never talk about it again.
Which, I mean, I guess that's what you would do is never talk about it because
The show lampshades it, like when you get the two Harry Kims, and one of them gets blown up,
Oh, right!
and then he
The
tries.
other one is the one they bring with them. They
Yeah.
like the whole rest of the show is parallel universe Harry Kim.
Yeah, and he's like, yeah. So how do you deal with this? And she's like, it's Starfleet. Wait, what?
and I always wanted like them to have a flash to B'Elanna in her quarters who saw Harry get sucked out into space, kind of be like, oh, they say he's the same, but he isn't the same.
I mean, Star Trek does not have a great history of trauma. Like, think of Miles O'Brien, who was, like, in a prison in his mind for equivalent of 20 years, and comes out and never mentioned it again. Like, he was in a gulag!
Miles is particularly kind of like the Geordie for getting mumped of, like, horrible stuff. Like, oh, my wife has been de-aged. Oh, my daughter has been
Aged.
Like, all the weird...
That's right. He's had both.
Right,
Ollie was really old and Keiko was really young.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. That couple's been through a lot.
Although that might be why on Deep Space Nine they just obviously hate each other towards the end.
That's the truth.
Yeah, even starting a throuple doesn't save them.
Yeah.
They have a throuple? I'm trying...
Well, they accidentally what's her name?
Kira Nerys.
Kira is real life pregnant from the doctor. And so they have to do something to like explain away her baby bump. And so the canon the show comes up with is that Keiko was pregnant and then there was a transporter accident where her baby is accidentally beamed into like Kira and
Or I
then
thought
her
there was
baby maybe
I
it's
thought
not
it
a
was a
transporter.
medical-
No, it's not a transport. She was going to lose the baby, so they moved the
right.
baby.
But then they can't
Into Kira.
remove it because of Bajoran
Stuff.
uses, who knows. Anyway. Yeah, exactly. Check.
For reasons.
For reasons. Because it's just to hide the fact that Kira is real life pregnant.
Right.
But like it gets weirder because it's not weird enough that she's just carrying their baby. She then moves in with them.
Yeah. Because
Yes, Dan. Yes,
I'm so
I am
glad.
not making this up.
I'm so glad I didn't watch this series. I'm so glad. Like,
No, you know what? If you watched Voyager, you can take DS9. I swear, I couldn't take Voyager.
I have seen Neil's favorite episodes, and that is sufficient for me. Like, I don't need to see...
Voyager. Deep Space Nine is very delightful in a lot of ways. Like, You just have to watch the ones with Garrick.
Oh, Garrick is easily the best character in the whole thing. Easily.
In all of Trek, quite possibly.
Yeah.
Although, let's just say, Odo is definitely in the same camp as Garibaldi when it comes
he's
to
100%
like
fascist. Yeah.
rights violations. Yeah, he is just as fascist, except he's like made out of jelly.
Yes.
He's fascist jelly.
That's right.
Yeah. You know, if you think about all the series that we've podcasted, most of them weren't very good with like gay people. Like,
Oh no.
I mean, especially Kindred the Embrace. It's San Francisco in the 90s, and there are no gay people around. Not one.
Except all the vampires who are really straight.
But like, I mean, TNG doesn't. There are no gay people in TNG.
Yeah,
Like, it's
which
all
is
wrong.
ridiculous because like I refuse to believe there's straight people in the future.
They have a right to exist.
Realizing our agenda.
Right.
I just
As long
don't
as they,
think
you know, keep it to themselves, you know, it's fine.
yeah.
But like none. I mean, Babylon 5 was better, certainly, than TNG.
Well, the fact that they had anything at all, I mean, it's done in that very, we're not going to talk about it kind of way, but the fact that the end of Talia Winter's story links directly to a romance, like,
True. But it is very kill your gays.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
have your gays turned out to be sleeper agents who then
right?
try to murder everyone.
And here's the thing, I actually do believe,
Seems legit.
right, I believe Straczynski when he said that there was an opening for her to come back. Like, the whole thing with Kosh and like the recording of her and stuff like that, I could see that happening.
But then they ruin everything with what's his bucket at the end? Marcus.
Oh,
That's the literal worst.
I think we had a headcanon about him that he was that player in your gaming group
Yes.
who's like super eager and you like him personally, but his role playing is shitty. So you just gotta deal with him.
I've got to say, that was one thing I did like about the podcasts in general, is like the random dips into like role-playing stuff, like people's character classes or their stats, or this is clearly a game and this player is doing this kind of thing. Like, we would do that randomly.
All right, so now I have a question here, and this is piggybacking off the Aquiel episode. So, Jill and Sin, would you ever podcast together?
Oh, I was thinking about this. I'm not sure. I would love to do a podcast with Jill, but I'm also not sure I'm responsible enough to like have a podcast rather than being a podcast guest.
Yeah, I feel like you're putting us on the spot there. Like,
Here's the thing. We inherited a podcast from Ryan Veeder. We're just paying it forward.
Maybe Jill and I can do the Deep Space Nine podcast.
Oh,
That'd be
That would
cool.
be fun, actually. That would be fun. But I don't know. I worry that neither you nor I have the organizational skills or time to make that happen. But it would be really fun.
I also have realized that really my real job is a little bit like a 3 times a week podcast that's about how computers work.
So, how was it doing Aquiel?
It was good, I thought. It was a little bit awkward because we didn't have quite the pattern down that you guys had like a system and a rhythm, and we're not that smooth yet. But aside from that, it was really fun.
I think beforehand we had to decide who would be the Dan and who would be the Neil.
Yeah, because we did 2 episodes together. We did Aquail, we did one other, and I can't remember what it was. And I think the first time we didn't decide that, and it was just weird. We couldn't decide who, like, we didn't have a good way of who was doing the play-by-play versus the commentary. And yeah, for Aquail, I think we actually did decide ahead of time, and it definitely helped.
well, that pattern is something you develop. Like, I've gone back and listened to the early. So like context, I don't know if we've ever talked about this. Neil and I recorded the entire first season of the podcast before it ever went up. Like
Oh
we
wow.
like over like Christmas break, like the month of December, like, and maybe a little earlier, maybe November, December of that year, because we started in January, and we just like we would do 2 or 3 a day, right?
If we had a day we didn't have anything to do, we just record most of the day.
And it was that sort of thing where it's the initial excitement of it, and like that, like we powered through it. It's why there are no guests after, in the first season or anything like that, because we recorded it long before we put it up. And it's painful sometimes listening to it because we haven't figured out the pattern. We haven't figured out the way to do it. Uh, I oh, my use of the word basically in the early episodes, everything is, well, basically like that's my, like, I'm thinking word. It's that and constantly. And I got better as it went, but that's, some of those early ones are really painful to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, as you guys know, I did phone tech support for 10 years of my life. And there is a special kind of hell involved in listening to your own recorded voice. There really is. I got over it eventually, because if I hadn't, I would have gone completely mad. But it's really hard to listen to yourself talk.
I think it was the pandemic, because before I really hated listening to my voice, and then like teaching via Zoom, like I was recording it, I was doing all this processing, and so now it doesn't bother me anymore. But
yeah, it is hard.
Yeah, I got used to hearing us because I mean it was just constant. Sometimes I got a little tired of it, honestly.
I never got tired of it. I still haven't listened to the final episode, but I've listened to every other one you've ever done.
Ooh.
Never got tired of it.
Aw.
yeah, my husband and I have a little like routine on Mondays where we would watch the show and then we would listen to the podcast. Very, very delightful.
Aw.
It was very fun because he kind of got to know you guys over just like listening to you all the time.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to like bring ourselves to it, and like I've been asked many times why we did it, right? And I think we did this podcast really the same reason we wrote our books or did anything else, was no one told us we couldn't. It was just like, well, let's just do it. Because if it's a shitty job, well, we can do it just as shitty a job as anyone. So
I feel like you two are like the most productive people I know. I hope your is just like getting high in the basement and watching TV for like a month straight and not taking on a new ambitious project.
well, we're trying to finish up our fourth novel. That's what's next.
Oh, okay. Well then.
So
We don't do that
I
much.
see.
Right.
Yeah. Compare that with how many 0 novels I've written.
Exactly.
Honestly, Dan and I have been creating art together for so long. I mean, it's one of the most natural things that I know now. Just like, be like, Dan, I had this idea. What do you think? And he'd be like, yeah, let's do this and the other thing. So honestly, I think this podcast, I remember when Ryan Veeder made that much, valued comment. I thought about it for a little while. I said, Dan, why don't we try it? Let's just see what happens to it. No one will probably listen, but sure, let's do it.
And you were mostly right.
What ended up being your highest listened season, out of curiosity?
I'm trying to think the numbers.
TNG.
Yeah.
When we were doing TNG, we were getting, I don't know, like up to 1,000 downloads per week.
Oh wow.
So like we probably, I guesstimate we had somewhere between 400 and 600 regular listeners. I mean, I'm sure some of those were duplicate and some of them were spiders and whatever. But that's my guesstimate.
And part of the problem is, and I've learned this since, splitting up the podcast into different podcasts was not a great move, because it's another step in the way for people like to find you or connect to you. Like we kept it as the Nitpicking podcast for the last few episodes we did, the last few series we did. But one thing I would have done differently was I would have genericized it to, it's the Nitpicking podcast. It starts with TNG. You can get all of them in one place.
Yeah, because changing the feed, like, that was annoying.
Yeah.
And it didn't work for a while, and yeah.
Well, the same is true in retail. If you move your business, then you lose a lot of traffic. Everybody knows that. Like, it's a common thing. Because even if people know that you've moved, and even if they know where you moved to, there is that extra step of, oh, now I have to go over there and do that instead. And a lot of times people are just not going to bother. Well, lessons learned. Check.
Right.
Oh, and we do reserve the right to come back if New Babylon 5 comes on television.
What are you going to miss the most about doing the podcast?
Ooh, good question.
For me, I used to do stand-up comedy, and I stopped because it's a tough business, and I was getting tired of it. And on the podcast, I was able to almost like do stand-up kind of things, and I'm going to miss that outlet.
I think it's just having that thing to do. Like Neil already said, like, oh, it's, next Saturday we're free. We can do wait, like we're not doing the podcast anymore. Like a lot of our weekends were set or at least scheduled around that. Like we need to get in so many podcasts before the next week or something like that. And then every Sunday we would sit together and edit them together, pick clips out, like, yeah.
And Neil, let's be honest, you're also going to miss tearing apart people's outfits.
It's the truth. I do it all the time in life. Like if I'm on the street or on public transportation, I'm always like, oh, nice skirt. Or like, I'd put a jacket on there. That would look better.
Yeah, and the fashions we had on display you had a lot to say.
Especially in Alien Nation, man, you were all over the fashion on Alien Nation. Whereas in Kindred, all you kept saying is the suits so big the suits.
I really want to skip so much of the '90s fashion. I just want that to go away. Everything was so big and like. I know in the 80s you had big things, but it would be structured, like with padded shoulders and things like that. So it's got structure. Whereas Julian's suits were just these shapeless kind of like... See, I'm already started.
Well, the most common comment was they look like they're wearing their dad's suits. Mm-hmm. Like everything was just so oversized.
Yeah. So I guess I'll miss that too. Although that's really my life, as Dan knows. I'm always... always... So, all right, I think we've gone through all our questions. So thanks, Sid and Jill, for not only appearing today, but for all these years of, schlepping onto Skype.
Thanks for having us. It was always a delight to get to tear apart a television show with you.
Absolutely. I'm gonna miss it. I'm gonna miss listening to you guys every week, and I'm gonna miss the times that I got to jump in and jackal along with you. So. But thank you for doing it for all these years. Like, especially, I'll get a little bit mushy here, like, especially during the pandemic when we couldn't hang out in person. Like, it felt like having my friends over and, like, hanging out together, even if we couldn't actually be there in person. So thank you for keeping it up.
Yeah, I think that was what we got a lot of comments over the years from people, like, thanking us or talking about, like, what it meant to them. And, yeah, some of the most touching ones were during the pandemic, that it was like, this has been a really hard time, and having this thing I can come back to every week has like really been useful. I think that was some of the most touching feedback we got on the podcast.
Yeah, legit.
So, all right. Well, thanks for listening, Nitpickers, and this is the Nitpicking Podcast signing off.
Bye-bye.